When I worked at HMRC, I worked in a team called the Fraud Investigation Service as an advisory accountant, looking at businesses that HMRC felt either were evading or avoiding tax. I found that there was a lot of small businesses that seemed like they were intentionally evading tax when they weren't. It just was a lack of financial education. I remember there was a case I was working on, and actually I was like, this person doesn't seem like someone that's actually trying to evade tax. I had this insight because of the community that I live in. This could be my shopkeeper, this could be my local garage, in terms of they're really good at what they do, but their finance side of it, they don't actually know what they're supposed to be doing. So that really kind of opened my eyes to say there's a gap here. I started off doing financial education seminars in the community. Naturally, as time went on, people just wanted more and more support. So I had a mentor, he had his own accountancy practice, trained with him a bit, and then essentially AccountStar grew to what it is now. A couple of years ago, I burnt out, and I think I needed to burn out to regroup, but I have a team, and I'm thankful that I'm at a place in my business where I can actually pay people. So I have an amazing operations manager, I have other accountants that work with me, and they really help me make sure that I'm not thinking. I'm neurodiverse. I also understood that a lot of people that are neurodiverse, managing finance is not always as straightforward. When a lot of clients came to me, the first thing I would do is like, let me set you up properly. You can set up a TikTok, and before you know it, you're making loads of money overnight. And I've seen that happen when people will come to me with like, I've made all this money and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. That financial education piece needs to come in a lot earlier. They say there's two things guaranteed in life: paying tax and death.
Yeah.
And so why isn't tax taught early enough? I grew up in North London in Tottenham. It is quite a poor borough in London, in the city. And I realised that a lot of us didn't have the role models, because a lot of us were either first generation here, so we haven't had the role models and things like that. So trying to like get onto a graduate scheme, if you didn't go to private school, how do you pass the psychometric testing and things like that? I talked about my journey earlier in terms of I started in a high street accountancy firm, then I had quite a successful career in government. So then a lot of people in my community were like, oh, how did you, they didn't even realise that that was within their reach to work in the city. And I work in the community, I work within my church as well to support people that need either financial education or need support in terms of like career coaching, just being confident when you go to an interview to be able to like sell yourself and say, I'm actually really dope at what I do.
Welcome back to episode 10 of When It Matters. I am here with the wonderful Stella Ezeogu. So pleased we're here for our 10th episode. Very exciting. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with your journey and your career background. I always say you and Fee are two of the busiest people I know. You guys have got so much going on. Tell me a little bit about what you're up to at the moment and your career to date.
Gosh, where did I start? Okay, so I actually started my accounting career, or my accounting sort of like life, from college. I actually done A-level accounting, and then I went on to do accounting and finance in university, and then I went on to do my ACCA, and I got my first my first kind of experience in a high street accountancy firm after I came out of uni. I struggled to get a job in a graduate job, in sort of like any of the big fours and things like that. So I worked at a high street accountancy firm, and that really sparked my interest in terms of like working with small businesses and tax. So then after that, I was like, okay, where can I find that about how tax really works? And then after that, I went straight into government. So I worked in government for almost 9 years. Well, yeah, just over 9 years. And I worked in HMRC, I worked for the Home Office, I worked for HM Treasury. So I really got to understand sort of like the policy side of it, and actually the action in terms of working with businesses. I worked on investigatory teams and things like that. We'll talk about that a bit later on, but that really sparked my interest in tax and accounting and things like that. And then after that, I moved into working in the fintech sector. So I worked for Monzo, I work for another fintech company at the moment, and I also run my own accountancy firm as well. And because of my journey in terms of not being able to get a job straight out of university, I was really passionate about helping people from underserved backgrounds get into the careers that they deserve. So that's kind of what I've been up to over the last.
So much unpack it. I don't know where to start. I think so with AccountStar that you have now. Tell me, like, what inspired you to kind of set that up, and cause your experience at HMRC really shaped that, right?
Yes. So when I worked at HMRC, I worked in a team called the Fraud Investigation Service, and I worked there as an advisory accountant, looking at businesses that HMRC felt either were evading or avoiding tax. I worked on both sides, and particularly on the evasion side, I found that there was a lot of small businesses that seemed like they were intentionally evading tax when they weren't. It just was a lack of sort of like financial education, or not understanding how to keep their books, not knowing when they should be paying taxes and things like that. Because when you start a business, things can move quite quickly. And I kind of was like, oh, actually, I remember there was a case I was working on, and actually I was like, this person doesn't seem like someone that's actually trying to evade tax. I had this insight because of the community that I live in, my local sort of like neighbours, shops and stuff, and I understood their temperament. So I was just like, this could be my shopkeeper, this could be sort of like my local garage, in terms of they're really good at what they do, but their finance side of it, they don't actually know what they're supposed to be doing. So that really kind of opened my eyes to say there's a gap here. And in HMRC, a lot of the people that worked there, I was quite young compared to some of the people that worked there. A lot of the inspectors have been there for like over 30 years. So I was able to come with a different kind of lens and a fresh pair of eyes to say, actually, this probably won't stand up in court and things like that, because this is actually what it looks like is happening here. So I started off doing financial education seminars in the community, educating people in terms of like, this is what you need to do to start up. These are sort of like the basics. This is what HMRC look out for. And that kind of started off with doing like events and webinars and workshops and things like that. And then everyone was like, oh, can you be my accountant? I was like, oh, I'm not actually doing that right now. I just want to kind of give you education. But naturally, as time went on, people just wanted more and more support. So I had a mentor who had he had his own accountancy practice. I trained with him a bit, and then essentially AccountStar grew to what it is now.
Wow, it's such an interesting story. So kind of falling into it basically because there's this massive gap in education with SMEs. And like, what does this look like when it appears as though they're evading tax when they're obviously not? Is it just not filing at all, just forgetting to file, not keeping anything up to date? Like, what does that look like?
It's a really good question. So it's more like messy books. So not having the right counting systems in place, not keeping all sort of like your receipts and things, and also not understanding how to extract money out of your business. So it might look like you want to pay yourself, so you're taking money out, but not knowing that actually, depending on your structure, you can't just take money out of your limited company. You can't just pull money out without having certain structures in place. Is it salaries, is it dividends and things like that? So it seemed like some people, and they were using different bank accounts, and I think that was a common thing that I saw with a lot of small businesses using different bank accounts. So sometimes HMRC would have assumed that, oh, are you trying to sort of like hide something white? But it's just sort of like, you might be a bit scatty. And also I'm neurodiverse, so I also understood that a lot of people that are neurodiverse, managing finance is not always as sort of like straightforward, and you have a system that makes sense to you, but the government, it might not make sense. So those are the kind of things that I was able to kind of like identify quite early on when I was looking at cases and things like that, and trying to like basically bring kind of like, as I said, that new kind of like fresh perspective. So when a lot of clients came to me, the first thing I would do is like, let me set you up properly in terms of like the basics, like having an accounting system, bookkeeping, get into good habits of keeping your receipts and things like that. Some of these really basic things that it seems basic, but it's a headache if HMRC do have an inquiry, because that's very daunting. It can be quite stressful. So yeah.
That makes so much sense. And I think also, you know, Fee and I were actually talking about this in our last podcast episode about how there's this kind of generation of really young entrepreneurs at the moment, which is so exciting, like with the AI boom and everything like that, who, you know, I mean, if you're a kind of grown adult, if you're in your 30s or 40s, you'll probably have a bit of basic financial literacy. But if you're dropping out of school, right, setting up your incredible AI company, finance might be one of the last things on your mind. So do you think this kind of financial education piece, and also the role of the accountant, financial advisor, CFO, is becoming increasingly important, and that gap of education is becoming increasingly prominent as well?
Yes, definitely, because as you said, people are starting businesses younger. Years ago, it was only like older people that were starting businesses, but now you can sort of like set up a TikTok, and before you know it, you're making loads of money overnight. And I've seen that happen when people will come to me with like, I've made all this money and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. Like, am I supposed to be declaring? And so I do think that financial education piece needs to come in a lot earlier in the education system, because tax, they say there's two things guaranteed in life: paying tax and death. And so why isn't tax taught early enough? And I think it really should be taught much earlier.
I would love to dive into that. I think I was speaking actually to a wonderful kind of called Emily Vass. I don't know if you know who.
Yes, I think
who's fabulous. She works with creators who suddenly make 200k like video engagements, that sort of stuff. And she was talking about how I think she had a creator who had to pay back £40,000 or something at the drop of a hat. I just need to know, like, out of interest, is the risk of like going to prison or anything like really severe quite legitimate? Because people get quite worried about that, right? Like,
so you would go to prison for tax evasion, right? So if HMRC, for whatever reason, so they've got different kind of like tiers in terms of like penalties and things like that, and if it seems like you deliberately didn't kind of like declare this money, then yes, you can go to prison. But if for whatever reason you, for example, you declared in sort of like 2024, but then HMRC noticed that you actually started trading like 3 years ago, they will ask for more information, and if you provide them that information, yes, you may get a fine, but you won't go to prison. But if, for example, they see that you are purposely not declaring any money, you've been running the business for years, then that's where the risk of evasion is. So I always say to people, at any point that you're not sure, just speak to an accountant. Most of us offer like free discovery calls or a quick chat, just so that you are reassured that you're not going to be one of those people that unfortunately do get prosecuted for this.
Wow. So basically acting in good faith and just really over communicating
exactly
is the key.
Yeah.
Okay, that's so good to know. And I guess, on the education piece, I find this so interesting as well, because I think at school, I don't think we had any modules at all about finance, which is sort of staggering. So if you could kind of redesign the UK system and like introduce sort of modules on finance, like what would be the first thing you'd want to kind of introduce? How would you bring this into the education system?
That's a really good question. I think initially it will be good to just have a basic understanding of different types of like what finance is, managing finance. I think early on we should be taught how we should actually be managing our finances, and then coupled with that, tax, because when you leave sort of like education, depending on what you decide to do, you go into work and then you get taxed on your pay slip, and sometimes people have no idea what this tax thing is. They don't know if they're getting paid correctly. I've worked in organisations where my pay has been wrong, and you won't know that unless you know, if that makes sense. If you know the base, if you know what a general tax code should be. So so I would say that understanding the basis of how to manage your finances and understand the basis of taxes should definitely be in sort of like the curriculum. I studied business studies, didn't really have anything on sort of like specifically on tax, only because I studied accounting. Then I was able to see sort of like the other sides of like finance and the tax, essentially.
It's so interesting, and I think in terms of for sort of small businesses now, small businesses listening to this, like what would be your, especially somebody who's young, maybe it's first time entrepreneur, first solo venture, etc., like what would be the maybe top 3 things you would recommend that they take into account from a finances perspective? Maybe they have an accountant, maybe they don't, but for them setting up their first venture.
So the first thing I always say is that if you're not good with your personal finances, you're unlikely to be good with your business finances. So if you already know that you maybe don't have the best habits, or you don't have the best habits, tackle that on its head sort of like straight away, and whether that is reaching out to sort of like financial coaches, not necessarily financial advisors, but coaches, so that you can kind of create better money habits, so that when you are investing in your business, you're not just sort of like squandering all your money and things like that. I'd also say that definitely speak to an accountant, even if you feel like you don't need an accountant now. Have a chat, have understanding in terms of what do I need to do, what structure, how much money do I need to put away for tax and things like that. And also get a habit of having a separate bank account for your business. So whether you've incorporated or not, have a separate account and treat that account like it is your business account, and don't let anything else come in. Be very strict with it. I think these basic things will really help businesses have a good sort of like setting, a good foundation from the outset.
I think that's such good advice, and really feeling quite empowered with your finances, right? Like feeling
Yes.
in control. And kind of, I think, speaking of which, I would love to talk about the impact community. Tell us a little bit about that. It's such an incredible initiative. Yeah. Sorry.
So impact were kind of birthed out of frustration of when I left university. I didn't find a graduate job straight away. It took me a while to find a job that matched my career aspirations, if that makes sense. So I noticed that people from underserved backgrounds, so I grew up in North London and Tottenham, so it's kind of like it is quite a poor borough in London, in the city, and there's a lot of people from ethnic backgrounds as well, and I realised that a lot of us didn't have the role models, because a lot of us were either first generation here, so we haven't had the role models and things like that. So trying to like get onto a graduate scheme, if you didn't go to private school, how do you pass the psychometric testing and things like that? So I was able to, I talked about my journey earlier in terms of I started in a high street accountancy firm, then I had quite a successful career in government. So then a lot of people in my community were like, oh, how did you, they didn't even realise that it was that was within their reach to work in the city. And me and my sister set up Impact, and she trained in the Big Four and things like that. But we both didn't go on graduate schemes. So what we've been doing over the last couple of years is really working in the community to try and support people to get into those roles that actually match their career aspirations. A lot of people came out of uni from our sort of like community and was working in retail for such a long time, but they had degrees and they want to do other things. So now I've expanded that, and I work sort of like in the community. I work within my church as well to support people that need either financial education or need support in terms of like career coaching, just being confident when you go to an interview to be able to like sell yourself and say, I'm actually really dope at what I do. I think a lot of people from my background in terms of like Caribbean African communities, sometimes we're a bit too humble, and that doesn't always translate well when you're going forward for like interviews and things like that. So we spent a good couple of years doing that, doing workshops, training, guidance, coaching, and as I said, a lot of it is confidence and also networking and letting people know that there's a lot of people within reach that you can speak to that can help you propel your career to the next level. So yeah, that's been a lot of work, but yeah, enjoyed it.
I think it's such an amazing initiative. Before my role at Mesh and my kind of stuff in startups, I was a recruiter, and kind of focusing on having DE&I initiatives and attracting people from a wide variety of backgrounds is so important and so beneficial for businesses. I think there's a really amazing stat actually, and I forget what it is. If I can remember it, I'll put it somewhere in the podcast, but something about how women with black female businesses with black female CEOs generate something X times more revenue than which is
exactly. And that's the thing, there's a lot of stats to show why it is important. And I think what we found, it wasn't, yes, there were some barriers into entry, but it was more because a lot of people felt that it wasn't within their reach. So what we did was trying to sort of like open their eyes so they can see that actually this is within your reach, that there are different places you can look. Like obviously LinkedIn's a great place to look, and just kind of just opening up their eyes to what is available to them.
And do you think now, again, in this kind of era of incredible AI and therefore a lot of opportunity, I mean, you know, a lot of the graduate schemes have been cut, for example, and there was like less intake of people, particularly in the big four and like big kind of conglomerates like that. And at the same time, you know, we've heard a lot about how it's the best time in history to start your own business. Some people are saying you don't need a technical co-founder anymore, whether or not that's true. I don't know if I agree with that or not, but you know, you've got Loverboy at your disposal, you've got Replit at your disposal. Have you found that your kind of career advice has sort of shifted a little bit, and particularly as an entrepreneur yourself, and now we're in this era where, you know, becoming an entrepreneur in theory should be a little bit easier. Has that kind of impacted your advice?
So I think that what I've encouraged people to do, there's a lot of people that identify early on that they probably don't want to stay in the workplace for ever. But I always say that because I think personally for me, I gained a lot from working in terms of being around the right people, having the resources and learning a lot that you wouldn't necessarily, not that you wouldn't necessarily, but it would have taken me longer if I'd done that all by myself. So in terms of how I kind of like guide people now is sort of like, don't despise small beginnings. Ensure that wherever you work, enjoy it and learn, take the resources, and then see where that can take you in terms of your entrepreneurial journey. So it has shifted in the sense that some people like, they want to leave. I don't want to work, I want to leave. I'm like, there's so much value in working, because that allows you to be able to set up your own business. You understand what structures are needed, because a lot of people, I've seen a lot of businesses sort of like fail because they kind of start prematurely because they're setting all of this, but they don't actually know what does good look like, if that makes sense. So I always encourage people to spend a couple of years within their chosen career field, be around the right people, have a good understanding, and then kind of like gradually start a side hustle, and then gradually sort of like start up your business.
I think that's such good advice, and particularly those first early career roles can be so formative, can't they? And to not really have that and go straight into your own venture, you lose a bit of that grounding, don't you?
I definitely think the early careers, it really shapes you, and it kind of gives you a different discipline, because as a founder, you have to encourage yourself every single day to get into a routine. And I do think that working, especially in your early years, does put you into a routine in terms of like every day waking up doing X, Y, and Z. And I think it does have like a great foundation. Definitely.
Yeah, that discipline is so important. And actually, because you know, you've had such a diverse career in the sense that you were in HMRC, and then you were at Monzo, and now you've kind of been with startups. Like, I'm so intrigued, like, which kind of environment has sort of taught you the most about both people and money? I think this is interesting.
It's a good question. So I think that I would say in my experience working in government, particularly HMRC, I got to see sort of like different sized businesses. So it wasn't only small businesses, it was medium sized businesses and stuff like that, and kind of see their behaviors and see the difference between having kind of good kind of either accountants or tax advisors, and having good people sort of like around you. Whereas in Monzo, when I worked in Monzo, we worked more in the community. So the whole point of Monzo Bank is making sure that money works well for everyone. We're really big on kind of making it accessible and things like that. So it was kind of like two different, it was more like, Monzo was more like personal finance. So I think what I saw is that people were scared of kind of like money, if that makes sense. So Monzo's done some great things in terms of like having easy way to invest. When I worked at Monzo, I worked with a few sort of like finance influencers, and we delivered loads of workshops to the community on sort of like investing and things like that. I worked with Black Girl Finance, the E-Man effect and things like that. And I noticed that in Monzo, we saw that a lot of people were just scared of like making money and how to manage it. Whereas I think in HMRC, I saw more that people just didn't really understand how the tax system works. So it was kind of like two different sides of it. Yeah.
The coin. Yeah. That's so interesting. And I guess so you kind of met all these different types of people. You've been exposed to all these, different types of financial literacy problems,
Yes.
and then obviously you set up AccountStar, and I think was it in 2024 you're one of the top 50 women.
I can't remember how many years ago. It
Yeah,
was a
what
couple
years?
of years
Yeah,
ago.
a couple
But yeah,
years
top
ago.
50 women in accounting.
Incredible milestone.
So that was actually quite humbling. A lot of that was due to kind of like my passion for financial education and the community, because whether it's in the workplace, whether it's outside of work, I'm very big on sort of like mentorship, ensuring people understand sort of like what's available to them in terms of like financially and things like that. And also social mobility is something that is really, really sort of like important to me, if you haven't already noticed. So a lot of that was around sort of like social mobility, encouraging people not to be scared to make money, because I think there's a lot of people that have been brought up in sort of like kind of like in traumatic environments where making money, they've seen sort of like their parents lose money and things like that, or things like homes have been taken away from them and stuff like that. So it's like now they're trying to overcome this cycle of fear of money. So I did a lot of work, and I am still doing a lot of work in terms of like, as I said, the financial education piece. So top 50 women in accounting was kind of to recognize people doing different things in the accounting space to kind of like promote finance, and make it more accessible to everyone. Yeah.
I think, yeah, it's such incredible work. And I think, yeah, that fear around money, it's funny because I feel as though it's something I wouldn't sort of think about, but actually it is such a sort of scary thing to be kind of grappling with, particularly if you're making it for the first time, or if you don't know how to manage it properly for the first time. So I think it's such sort of important work. And I guess, to kind of sort of finish up a little bit, in terms of like, your kind of core financial advice kind of gems, what would be, I'd love to do one for businesses and for individuals.
Okay.
Yeah, talk us through, if you're going to leave us with a couple of like gems.
So I think on the personal finance side of things, I think something that I'm glad that I done early on was, well, one of my first jobs I opted out of my pension, but then when I worked in government I didn't opt out of my pension. And I find that a lot of people now, when they get their pay slips and they see this money going to the pension scheme, they opt out. So I do encourage people to opt into your pension scheme, even if you're quite young, because I think a lot of young people think, oh gosh, that's in how many years, 40, 50 years, I need to worry about that now. But it's just an easy thing for you to, an easy way to put money into your pension pot without having to think about it. I think people underestimate the importance of investing into a pension scheme. There's a lot of tax benefits that come with it. So I always say to people, opt into your pension scheme, and if you are employed, that means your employer is putting free money into your pension pot as well. So that's something that I always say, opt into your pension pot. That's kind of like an easy gem. When it comes to businesses, I might be a bit biased, but I think as early as possible speak to an accountant, just so that you know what you should and shouldn't be doing, even if it's just one consultation. I find that a lot of people, as soon as they get a business idea, they decide to set up a limited company straight away. And sometimes that's kind of like the worst thing that you can do if you're not sure what direction you're going in, because that once you set up a limited company, you have to file company accounts each year, file confirmation statements, file corporation tax return, possibly a self-assessment return, and you just started a business and you don't have the right people on hand. So I would say don't incorporate too early. Understand what you need to do before you want to incorporate. Speak to advisor, whether it's a tax person or accountant, and have one. This is a basic one, but have one business bank account, for one account for your business. Don't mix your personal finances. Keep it separate. And a key one, pay yourself first. I think a lot of people, when they start a business, they don't pay themselves, and then that habit will continue, and then you realize that you've been running your business for how many years and you haven't been paying yourself properly. So treat your salary or whatever it is you're going to pay like any other expense in your business. So that's one thing that I would,
I love that advice. That's so interesting.
Yeah,
falling out of the habit of paying yourself.
It's such a common thing. Pay yourself. Make sure you're paying yourself, because essentially you're not trying to work for free. Yes, the first couple of years can be a bit hard, but include that in your budget in terms of what you need to pay yourself.
I mean, I can imagine that's actually so easy to do. And also, it's probably coming from a good place. Like, oh, I'm going to pay my employees, get everything, all my ducks in a row, and not really prioritising yourself. And also, that's kind of part of the empowerment piece as well, right? I know we're nearly at time, but I actually had one more question I wanted to ask you.
Sure.
Because you're sort of doing everything. You're a global tax manager at Smart Pension. You have this community, then you have AccountStar as well. I just want to know, how do you balance it all? Give us the time management, priority tips, tricks, and words of wisdom.
That's a really, really good question, because I remember a couple of years ago, around lockdown times, I burnt out, and I think I needed to burn out to kind of like regroup. But I have a team, so now I have a team, and I'm thankful that I'm a place in my business where I can actually pay people. So I have an amazing operations manager. I have other accountants that work with me, and they really help me sort of like make sure that I'm not thinking.
You go to sleep.
Yes, exactly. So
I love that. And then I had one more question I wanted to ask you. I think we just have about time for it. I wanted to ask you, what is the most rewarding part of your job? Because I honestly think, actually, Fia and I were talking about how in the accounting profession there are less people going into this, and as you were talking, it sounds like such an incredibly rewarding position. But I would love to know, for you, what really makes it worthwhile.
It's a really good question. I would say for me, like, accounting and finance is not sexy. I think we all know that, but I get joy when it clicks, when someone's like, oh my gosh, I actually understand. I understand this now, and they feel confident, they feel empowered. So I think for me, I'm really about people, and I really want to help people, and that's why I do what I do. So for me, it's that kind of like seeing someone go from kind of being a bit sort of like scared, timid, and now being confident and not afraid to make money and not having HMRC letters and,
knocking on their door.
So that's what's rewarding to me.
That's such a good answer. Do you have any stories, like any particular ones that stand out?
So I remember there was a client that that came to me. She was an older lady, and she had got herself, unfortunately, into this sort of like HMRC mess where she had a property, and it seemed like she went through one of these schemes that they sold her a dream and said, oh, all of this, whatever, and they didn't give her the right support, so she didn't know what she should be declaring and when and things like that. And then HMRC wanted to go back almost like 10-15 years, and I really worked with her to kind of like understand, okay, this is what you need to be doing, this is all the information and things like that. And I helped her sort of like not get a fine from HMRC. Yes, she had to pay back tax, but she honestly felt so sort of like relieved, and she was like, Stella, thank you so much. It was just like that joy of seeing someone, because it did cause depression, those kind of things. Like, I've seen a lot of my clients, like, you have all these letters, it is overwhelming, they don't know how to deal with HMRC, they have the fear that they're going to go to prison, as we talked about earlier. So it was really just being able to be sort of like her right hand woman in that instance. And I've had quite a few clients that have had similar situations where I know it sounds a bit dramatic, but they have been victims of financial abuse. So it's almost like me being able to sort of support them through that, and then them being on the other side and having jobs now that they can just not worry about HMRC, and they're paying their taxes and things like that. So
I think that's such a kind of special note to end on. I think helping somebody get out of the woods like that. Yeah, it's kind of like a life-saving, life-changing sort of,
and I know it is a bit dark. Like, a lot of people do want to I have a lot of clients that have come and said they want to close down their business simply because of letters from HMRC and Companies House. Like it can be quite overwhelming when you just kind of like miss that one thing, and or you've had a life situation that is, you know, people have gone through divorces, they've gone through grief, and it kind of just throws them off. And just being able to help them kind of come back to who they were when they initially started up this business or this venture,
and find that love again in their business and their day to day. Stella, thank you so much. What a lovely episode.
No, thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much.